Now, when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. Then a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house. Because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. And as Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. But no one could heal her. So she came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me." Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. And then he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." Good for her. Yeah, I'm glad that that woman was healed. Good for her, because she was suffering. She had a reputation in her community as someone who was unclean. She was cast out amongst her peers. She was suffering. And she just happened to come across Jesus. She just happened to walk into Jesus and touch his garment by no work of her own. It just so happened the crowd pressed up against him, and she was there in that moment, and she was healed. But not only was she healed, but Jesus makes a spectacle out of her. She's publicly restored and honored, and Jesus encourages her. He builds her up, and he commends her faith. But what about Jairus? You remember Jairus? So he's the one that came to Jesus in the first place. This guy, Jairus, he was a faithful believer. He honored God. He came to Jesus with intention. He fell to the feet of Jesus. He worshiped Jesus and he said, please, Jesus, heal my only child. I've only got one. Heal my child. And he didn't stumble upon Jesus by accident. The crowd didn't press him into Jesus. He came to Jesus with intention, knowing his daughter was about to die. Now, we don't know why she was going to die. Maybe she had cancer. Maybe she had a heart defect. We don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us. We just know that she was dying and her father was desperate. And at first it looks like Jesus is going to come help him. But there's all these people. And the crowd is pressing in. It's mayhem. All these distractions. And then there was this woman. And it looks like she got the blessing that he was going to get. It looks like that she got the blessing that he deserved. This doesn't seem fair, especially when we read verse 49. Because it says, while Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, a synagogue leader, and he says, "Your daughter is dead." And then he says, "Don't bother the teacher anymore." I'm Jairus. I'm saying, what do you mean my daughter's dead? You mean my daughter's dead because Jesus was too distracted talking to this woman? Now Jesus, Jairus, he takes his problem to Jesus. He goes to worship him in humility. And it looks like Jesus is going to answer. But then there's this distraction and then tragedy. Maybe you can't identify with Jairus because maybe you've never had a child whose life ended in tragedy. But maybe you have approached God with a problem. God, I'm sick. God, I don't know which way to go. God, I hurt. And then you wait for an answer. And you wait, and you wait, and there's no answer. And maybe in the middle of that it looked like there was going to be an answer. Maybe for a minute, it looked like God was going to respond, and then he didn't. And then there was nothing. And you felt like all hope was lost. Maybe you've been praying for that child to get well. Some of you have had a sick child. You know how much that hurts, how scary that is, how terrifying that is. Or maybe it's that child you wanted to come back home. They've been gone and they're lost. They're making bad decisions and you just wish they'd come home so you could start fresh, so you can show them what love and forgiveness looks like. Or maybe you've been praying for your husband, praying that God would end that addiction that's ravaging his life. Or maybe you're praying for your own sobriety and you just can't get any traction. It's so difficult. It's such a battle and it's all uphill and you can't win. So maybe you feel worn out and maybe you feel hopeless and you start asking God, why? Where are you? Why won't you answer me, God? And you start wondering, is God still good when life is not? Is God still good when my life is a mess? Is God still good when my kids won't talk to me? Is God so good when the doctor looks at the test and he says it doesn't look good? Is God still good when you can't get the loan? When your back hurts so bad you can't even get out of bed? Is God still good when everything seems so bad? These are questions that all of us have asked, are asking, or will at some point in our lives ask. And especially if you've been alive for a while, you'll understand that most of our lives are either spent wondering when and how God's going to act, or waiting for him to finally act and sort out the mess that we have in our lives. These are the questions Habakkuk asked of God in the short little book that we've been reading over the past few weeks. The prophet's name, or first of all, the prophet is what? He's like a pastor, right? A prophet's a pastor. He's someone who communicates on behalf of God to people. Now, Habakkuk means to wrestle with God. And that's what he's been doing for these first few chapters. He's wrestling with God. He's asking him difficult questions. And he starts by asking him, God, why do you allow injustice? Why do you allow corrupt leaders? Do you ever wonder that? Why poverty? Why violence, God? He even says in chapter 1, there's violence all around me. And God says, I'm going to fix this. But first I've got to break it. And Habakkuk doesn't like that answer because he knows what God is talking about is these people called the Babylonians. And God sends the Babylonians to Israel to destroy Israel. And so Habakkuk can't figure out why God would send calamity, why God would have to break something to fix it. He doesn't get it. But God promises to renew and restore his people, even if it doesn't look like what Habakkuk is expecting. God will bring justice. God will save his people, but Habakkuk will have to wait for it. So in these first few chapters, there's really no resolution to Habakkuk's question, and this doesn't seem fair. It doesn't seem right, and you know that because you've been there. He wants to know where God is when the world looks so bad. And all he's learned is that God will answer and God will save, but it's not going to be in a way that Habakkuk wants it to be. It's not going to be in a way that he's expecting. He's not going to be in a way that he desires. And he's going to have to wait. Now, of course, the story can't end like this. That's why you got 3 chapters. It can't end with this note of discord. There's got to be some kind of satisfying ending. And I told you we'd get there. I told you we'd get there in chapter 3, and here we are. Here we are in chapter 3. Where is God when life is hard? Is God still good when life is not? How will God deliver us from our trouble? What are we supposed to do while we wait? focus on these questions and the answers to these questions in chapter 3. In chapter 3, Habakkuk says to God, I have heard about you, Lord. I'm filled with awe by your amazing works. Now, what's interesting about Habakkuk, I said his name means to wrestle, and I said a prophet communicates to people on behalf of God, but Habakkuk is a prophet that communicates to God on behalf of the people, and that's all you hear about or read about in this book of Habakkuk is Habakkuk communicating to God, not to the people. And as we start chapter 3, he's giving God praise. I have heard all about you, Lord. I'm filled with awe by your amazing works. And this is very important to remember because Habakkuk is in anguish. Habakkuk is suffering. Habakkuk is heartbroken. Have you felt that way? Have you been heartbroken? Have you been in anguish? Have you suffered through a trial? Has it felt like your world is crashing in? Then you know where he's coming from. And yet, he's giving praise back to God. But as we keep reading, his praise turns into a petition. Do you know what a petition is? Petition is when you ask for something. It's when you request something, when you request relief. So Habakkuk says in his petition, he says, in this time of our deep need, help us again as you did in years gone by. And in your anger, remember your mercy. God, we've seen you rescue us in the past. Will you do it again? We are in need. We need you. Will you rescue us as you did before? God, I know that we've been unfaithful to you. I know, God, we've rebelled against you. I know we've turned our backs on you. I know you're angry with us, but please, God, have mercy on us. Love us, God. Give us grace, God. Rescue us, God. So Habakkuk gives praise. Then Habakkuk gives petition. And then something pretty incredible happens. Habakkuk has a vision where he sees God. He sees the activity of God. And as he's describing this vision, he's describing what he views of God in this vision, and he says, his glory covered the heavens, and his praise filled the earth. His splendor was like the sunrise, rays flashed from his hand. Habakkuk's describing the glory and majesty of God. He's describing the immense power of God. And in this vision, he sees two parts, like two acts of a play. He sees first a vision of the past when God rescued his people from calamity way back then. And then he sees a vision of the future where God will rescue Habakkuk and his people from calamity and destruction. He sees God working in the past. He sees God rescuing in the past. He sees God working in the future. He sees God rescuing in the future. He sees God restoring and reviving in the past, restoring and reviving in the future. So now, Habakkuk has heard the promise of God to save, but he's also seen it. So he knows it in his mind. He hears it with his ears. He has seen it with his eyes, so he can expect that God will deliver his people as he says he would. But why now? Why now, after all this time, all this wrestling with God, the back and forth, the confusion, the feeling of hopelessness, the feeling of discouragement, the feeling like that there was no answer? Why now is God finally revealing his plans to Habakkuk? One word. Worship. 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 Back in verse 1, we can read verse 1, but it says that Habakkuk's praise, petition, and vision began with prayer, and then it says this strange thing. In the Hebrew, it says on Shigionoth. That's kind of a fun word. On Shigionoth. Like, you can say it if you remember that old song, Getting Jiggy with It, but it's like getting shiggy with it. Man, what's Brian getting up there? He's way funnier than this clown. But can you try to say that with me? Shigionoth. Shigionoth. Someone over here needs to learn how to enunciate better because it sounds like something you shouldn't say in church. So Shigionoth, okay? Just in case someone ever asks you, okay? You got to read that again. Okay, Shigionoth. Good. Good job, kids. Okay. Oh. Okay, your turn's over. Okay. So, Shigionoth means a worship song or a song sung with intense passion. It's that song, you sing it with your soul, like when you're at home and you're in the shower and no one's home, and so you sing that song real loud because you know no one's gonna hear it. You know what I'm talking about, Shigionoth? Uh-huh. You're driving in the car and you're at the stop sign and you're singing with your soul, and you look over, someone's looking at you laughing, and you don't care, Shigionoth. That's how Habakkuk's singing with his soul. Praise, petition, and vision, because he began with prayer. A prayer that he sings with passion. A prayer that he sings with his entire soul. I felt like that when I was watching you guys sing. A little bit ago, I felt that. You're singing that song with passion. Now listen. Habakkuk hears from God, and he sees God, and he experiences God because he worships God. The vision of the promise fulfilled is initiated through authentic and passionate worship of God. I want to act like you just got a revelation here, okay? Because worship of God reveals the truth of God, right? Worship of God reveals the truth of God. Worship of God reveals the truth of God. Are you writing that down? Are you remembering that? Because you're going to need it when you leave. In Habakkuk's trouble, in his questions, in his wondering, and in his waiting, what does he do? He worships. And it's in his worship that he sees God clearly, and he sees God's promises revealed. He sees that God has rescued before, and that he'll rescue again. God pulled them out of exile and calamity in the past, and he will pull them out of exile and calamity in the future. And he will do this through a king. God will do this through a king known as the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the Lion of Judah, the King of Kings, the Mighty One, the Door, the Way, the Word, the True Vine, the Truth, the Victorious One, Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His name is Jesus, and he's coming to reclaim, restore, and renew. He was excited too. Because here's what he says. Here's what he sings in Shigionoth. Even though the fig trees have no blossoms and there is no grapes on the vines, even though the olive crop fails and the fields lie empty and barren, even though the flocks die in the fields and the cattle barns are empty, yet I rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in the God of my salvation. The Lord is my strength. He makes me sure-footed as a deer, able to tread on the heights. When I don't know what's going on, he helps me stand tall and walk up on the mountain, because that's where I need to go to experience him and bring him back down into the valley. Even though I'm hungry and poor, alone and broken, I will give praise to God because he's coming to save. And I can stand tall and secure, confident and bold because I know that he will claim victory over my poverty and glory over my calamity. The sovereign Lord is my strength. Come on. The sovereign Lord is my strength. The sovereign Lord is my strength. Now understand that Habakkuk is making these bold declarations and he's worshiping with passion before his trouble is over. Write it down. Remember it. Put it on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, wherever you're at, put it there. Go home with it because you're going to need it. He was worshiping in the middle of his trial, knowing it was going to get worse before it would get better, much worse. And this, listen, and this is the answer to all those questions. Where is God in my struggle? Can God be good when life is not? Why has God not yet acted on my behalf? The answer is found in worship. 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 Passionate, honest, vulnerable, on your knees, on your face, hands in the air, total vulnerability, total openness to God, worship. Now, I can understand why that might seem strange. Especially, and I know every time we have church, we love the fact that people who are new to church come to church. So I can understand that could seem strange, especially if you're working on your faith or you're brand new and you're just starting to hear about Jesus. You wonder, how can worship be the appropriate response to tragedy and loss? How can worship be an answer to my question? Why would I worship something that has the power to heal and restore and won't or will as long as I wait for some special circumstances or receive it on his terms? I get all those questions. I totally get it. I understand it. It is tough. But the reality is, and if you've never listened to something before in church, listen to this. The reality is, you are all, and when I say you, I mean me, we are all already worshiping something. What I'm about to say is going to be hard, but I want you to listen. When I'm in anguish over the loss of my job or the loss of my health, when my world is destroyed because I lose things, I'm making those things the center of my universe, and I'm giving those things the power to control my life. If I don't think I can find peace or satisfaction until I have those things, then that's what I'm worshiping. And so if I remove the focus of my worship from the thing that I've lost or the thing that I'm missing or desiring, and I place it back to God, I'm giving love and honor to the one who can heal, the one who can restore, the one who can replace, instead of the thing that will perish or spoil or fade. And God can heal, he can restore, and he can replace. But listen, it does not mean that he will. And be okay with that. When I said last Sunday, I said that sometimes in our preaching, we can promise things that we should not promise. And we can make the mistake of believing that God wants the same things for us that we want for us. But if our focus is the things that we want, if our focus is the way we've been slighted, or the things that have been taken from us, or the things that we want to get back, God isn't the thing we want to worship. We want to worship our position. We want to worship our jobs. We want to worship our health. We want to worship our friends and our relationships. And then God isn't the thing we worship. He's not the thing we want to worship. He's just a genie that we want to give us more stuff. Most of the things that we want, security, wealth, relationships, health, education, influence, fame, have nothing to do with the tools God wants to give you to change your life and the lives of people around you. What we want is small. What we want is small, and it will spoil and die and fade and wither. God wants to give us eternal gifts that we can use to restore our lives, the lives of our family, the lives of the people in our community. Things like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Because when I have these things, I can be sick and I can be satisfied. I can be broke and I can be joyful. I can be single and I can be content, because I can have nothing and have everything all at the same time. And this is why we worship. In our worship, we say, I don't understand it, but I know you can fix it. I feel broken, but I know you can repair it. It may not look the way I want it to, but I trust, God, that you want the best for me. I trust, God, that your will is what I need to survive. I trust that my hope has to be in you. And as we worship, God will reveal to you more intimacy. And as you worship, God will continue to build confidence in you. Not confidence in yourself, but confidence in Him. And as you worship, your priorities will change, and you will develop a heart of perseverance so you can stand up when the world's crashing down, and you can say, I don't need all of this because I have Him. I can have nothing and have everything. And as you worship, faith will be restored. Hope will be renewed. And as you worship, and this is the best part, as you worship, people will see you, but they'll see Christ in you. And they will marvel at the miracles that have taken place in your heart. And as you point them to Jesus, they will begin to worship Him too. I'm always amazed when I read about Paul. If you know the Apostle Paul, you know that he's the greatest missionary in history. But his life was brutal. In his writing, you see him give vivid descriptions of his suffering. Paul says in 2 Corinthians 1:8-10, he says, we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about the troubles we experienced in the province of Asia. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we have received the sentence of death. We felt like we had received the sentence of death. So his struggle was so difficult that Paul felt like his life was hanging in the balance beyond the ability for him to endure. Pressure that was unbearable. It was so bad that living seemed intolerable. So bad that he felt like he had received a sentence of death. But watch what he says. Get ready for this. He said, but this happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but God who raises the dead. He has delivered us from such a deadly peril, and he will deliver us again. On him we have set our hope that he will continue to deliver us. This had to happen so that we would learn how to worship God in our struggle. And through this worship, we learn how to rely on God. And in relying on God, we're not crippled by our circumstances. We don't lose focus on the mission. He delivered us from such a deadly peril that he will deliver us again. On him we have set our hope that he will continue to deliver us. He delivered us before, and he'll deliver us again. That sound familiar? It's the same thing Habakkuk said. You delivered us before, and you'll deliver us again. How many times, God, will you deliver us? How many times? Again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again. How many times will you bring deliverance and salvation when it seems impossible, God? Again, and again, and again, and again. How many times will you have taken what I've lost and replace it with glory, God? Again, and again, and again, and again. This is the confidence you gain in worship. This is the hope you gain in worship. And as you worship, you begin to remember that you don't have to rely on yourself to get you through your trial. You rely on a God who has the power to raise the dead. The power to raise the dead. And if he can raise the dead, there's nothing in your life that he cannot revive for his glory. Nothing in your life that he cannot renew and restore. When you have a God who can raise the dead, there is always victory on the horizon. Always hope in the dark. Even when you think the story's over. You remember Darius? Darius was that guy. He approached Jesus and he asked Jesus to heal his daughter. Remember? And Jesus started to go on his way, but he was distracted, and this other woman came along, and this other woman captured Jesus' attention. And Jesus, he heals this other woman, and he's talking to this other woman, and it seems like that Jesus is distracted, and he forgets about Darius. And in the middle of this, Darius, he hears the news, and someone says, your daughter's dead. And then they say to this man who's grieving, don't bother the teacher anymore. Look, man, your daughter's dead. Hope is gone. Don't bring your issue to Jesus. He can't do nothing about it. Anybody ever tell you that? Jesus can't do nothing about your struggle. Jesus can't do nothing about your loss. Why are you wasting your time bringing that back to God? God isn't real. God doesn't love you. God's got no power over your loss. He's got no power over your trial. Have you heard that? Hearing this, oh, Jesus, you're so good. Hearing this, Jesus said to Darius, come on, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Just believe and she will be healed. Jesus doesn't forget about Darius. Because Darius came to Jesus in worship. On his hands and knees, saying, please save my daughter. I just got one. She's going to die. And Jesus honored his worship. When he arrived at the house of Darius, he did not let anyone go in with him except Peter and John and James. He didn't want the crowds there. This wasn't for the crowds. And the child's father and mother. And meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her. Stop wailing, Jesus said. She's not dead. She's just asleep. And they laughed. They laughed knowing she was dead, laughing because the things that we want from God and expect from God are always smaller than what He can deliver. We want something this big. He wants to give us something this big. They were laughing because they didn't understand that the power of God is unleashed through obedience and worship. But He took her by the hand and He said, my child, get up. And her spirit would return. And at once she stood up. She got up. She got up because we have a God who can raise the dead. We have a God who can raise the dead. We have a God who can raise the dead. And our worship has the power to restore and to revive. How many times? Again and again and again and again and again. Stand up, church. Say it with me. Again and again and again and again and again and again. How often will we worship? Again and again and again.
I know your plan.